We have done it. We've reached the final arc of Bleach, and I'm honestly a little stunned, but more than anything, extremely excited. There are so many questions that I want to see answered, and so many parts of this world that I want to explore more before the end, and now it's just a matter of what storyline could close out everything that we know. What could everything we've been through have been building toward? And so far, I think Kubo has a wonderful answer to those questions by bringing forward a plotline that has mostly been hidden in the past of Bleach's history, but has been known to us through most of the story. There is a lot to live up to when you name a story the 1,000-Year Blood War. Like, what a metal, badass title to begin with, and the name promises something expansive and enormous, and well, a war. And as much as I despise war in the real world, so many great stories have very exciting wars, battles, and fun fights in the middle of these enormous conflicts. So it has me pretty excited just from the name of the arc alone, and I'm hoping it lives up to that title, because there are stories where there are supposed wars, but they end up being kind of small, and don't have that feeling of a prolonged conflict. Like, everyone calls that period of One Piece the Whitebeard War, or the Paramount War, or the War of the Best. But I'm sorry, that was a singular battle. You could include Ace being captured, you could include the breakout of Impel Down, sure, but that was a battle. That was not a war. It could have been a war if things ended differently, but that was a battle. Yes, there were many fights within that battle. I don't know if I'd call that a full-on war, so I'm hopeful that 1,000-year blood war is gonna capture the horror of a large-scale conflict. But obviously I'm curious if this has been a war that lasted 1,000 years, or is going to take that long to end starting now. Given what I learned in this part of the story, I assume it's the former, because of a very, very old grudge. So let's get into it, because this arc starts off with a bang, as most wars do. We're kind of immediately thrust back into the larger Bleach world, the one that we took a bit of a break from during the Lost Agent arc, and now we're suddenly launched into the thick of it as hollows are apparently disappearing and being eliminated very quickly, so we've already got a bit of a mystery started, which was very intriguing for me from the jump. But in contrast to the Fullbring storyline, slower introduction of school, soccer, and duffel bags, we have the action-packed opening salvos of a full-scale war. First, we're introduced to a pair of young rookie Soul Reapers, Yuki Ryunosuke and Shino Madarame, that have been assigned to Karakura Town to replace the guy that may be the most unremarkable character in the series. I'm sorry if you're a fan of his, I don't know how. It's made immediately clear that these two are very green and inexperienced, but Soul Society is apparently sending multiple Soul Reapers to guard Karakura Town, so they don't have to rely on Ichigo so much, which is kind of an interesting development, because he really has been such a help to them. If I were these two shinies, I would be absolutely terrified to be stationed in Karakura Town. That place has a whole lot of bad juju. Besides how many hollows we've seen there throughout the series, there's also the fact that, like, the whole reason Karakura Town was going to be used to create the Oaken was because it's full of all kinds of spiritual energy, or as my guy Ray Stantz says in Ghostbusters, Spook Central. And sure enough, like 2 seconds into coming onto this new job, the two are attacked by some of the most monstrously beautiful hollows I have ever laid eyes upon. Anyone that's been watching these videos for a while probably remembers how much I love the hollows, and I was really happy to see them again, especially in this way, and especially while so many hollows are apparently, and tragically, are getting slaughtered off screen. With the way it seems, my masked monster babies are being rapidly pushed toward extinction, so it was a relief for my hollow loving heart to see them, but not a relief for the Soul Reapers. I loved that this scene acted as a reminder of the horror of hollows. I love when they're allowed to be scary, and these gargantuan hollows were giving me Attack on Titan vibes in the best way. Like, compared to Ichigo these days, hollows aren't much, but to ordinary Soul Reapers, yeah, they can be terrifying. Also, the anime ramped up the sheer number of them, but we'll get to talking about the anime in a bit. But speaking of Ichigo, he had an amazing entrance into this final arc. After the rough road he had to get his powers back, it's amazing to see him like this, so confident and strong and comfortable. From the perspective of the rookie, Ichigo is like a superhero in this moment. And once we see Orihime, Chad, and Uryu, the whole team feel like the Avengers. Like, this is our core group of heroes. Since very early on, look how far they've come. Look at, they're like a unit. It's great. And I really liked how they're kind of legendary among the Soul Reaper rookies, and it got me thinking about that perspective. These were the Ryoka that infiltrated Soul Society and made a mess of the Sarate and ended up becoming some of the Soul Reapers' most important allies. So it's only natural that this team is regarded like this, and I love it so much. This is them at their most heroic, and it was amazing to see, especially with how the anime did it. But again, I've got a lot to say about those changes later. We still gotta just talk about the general story, and I'll get to the anime changes later on. After saving them, our gang help out the newbie Soul Reapers in the way that Orihime knows best, delivering bread. This whole thing is a great opportunity to get reintroduced to our protagonists, and is another stark contrast to the Lost Agent arc's opening chapters, not only with Ichigo acting as a Soul Reaper, but with him no longer being isolated and alone. He's got his powers, his friends, his purpose, and is directly interacting with the Soul Society again. Everything feels pretty right in the world. It's a moment of bliss in a way. Like, yes, we just killed these giant monsters, but that's what the job is. That's what these people do. This is all just a day in the life of these characters. But while that's happening in the living world, something weird is happening in the Soul Society as a whole village in Ikaku and Yumachika's district suddenly goes missing. It's an interesting little mystery to ponder, as the clues seem to point toward members of the village abducting their own neighbors. It could be some sort of mind control maybe, or some conspiracy, I'm not sure, but I like the creepy feeling of it. It reminded me of the story of Roanoke, with a whole town of colonists vanishing, and just gave an unsettling, creepy layer to think about, especially if it's connected to the war that's starting up. Like, where did these souls go? And for what reason were they taken? Given who ends up being the new antagonists, maybe they were taken to be experimented on in retribution, because we need to get into who our mysterious new enemies seem to be. Because everything suddenly gets wild, and I mean suddenly, like out of the blue, when a random stranger is standing on Ichigo's bed. All of a sudden, what a startling entrance out of nowhere that's extremely effective and feels very invasive. The Kurosaki Clinic hasn't always been a safe haven or anything, considering Fishbone D broke through the wall in Chapter 1, or our beloved cousin Shu paying a visit last arc, but it still naturally feels like it breaks the cozy security of a home. Also, it kind of has echoes of when Rukia first showed up in Ichigo's room, something that changed his life completely, and now this guy may be heralding a big new change as well. Also, I couldn't help but hear Ichigo's "get off my bed" line being spoken like Harrison Ford in Air Force One. Punting him out of the window without a second thought made me laugh too. But at first glance, I was thinking along the same lines as Ichigo. It looks like the guy has a piece of hollow mask on his face, so it's understandable to think that this is an Iran car. You know? It's natural to jump to that conclusion. I certainly did. And the possibility of that obviously excited me, because it's been a while since we had some Iran car action, and if they were showing up along with the hollows, that bodes well for my personal taste. I'd love to see more Iran cars. But even though we're just at the beginning of the arc, Kubo has already duped me, because this guy Eburn apparently isn't an Iran car. No. Here's a brief clip of the moment I was reading and I realized what he was, as he showed off a familiar looking piece of apparel. That's like Uryu's. Is this guy a Quincy? Is this a Quincy? Holy... Yeah, he's a Quincy. I'm not sure why he's got a piece of hollow mask on his face, though. Maybe he's like a hybrid, if that's possible. Maybe there are survivors of Mayori's experiments, and one of Mayori's experiments was fusing a Quincy with a hollow. Or maybe this is a Quincy that's wearing a broken Arankar mask as a trophy. I don't know. It's possible. All of it's possible, maybe. So he could still sort of be an Arankar, I guess. But yeah, it seems like he's a Quincy. And evidently, he's not the only one. There are living Quincy's, and I'm sitting there like, is this a surviving sect that managed to avoid extermination, or was what really happened to the Quincy not what we thought and was hidden the whole time? I don't know. This is shocking, and I'm surprised I never really considered anything like this outside of my brilliant Nemu theory that she was made from the Quincy's Mayori experimented on, which I still hope is true, and it could still be true. Yeah, crazy. And obviously this changes the dynamic of this universe as a whole. Since very early in the series, the Quincy, or Quincy's, what's the plural on that? Is it Quincy? Is referring to the group as well, or are they Quincy's? Let me know. Since very early in the series, they've been depicted mostly in the past tense, with the vast majority of them being dead. Like, they were a faction once upon a time, but in the current story of Bleach, they weren't really a team on the board anymore, except for Uryu and sort of his dad. It makes complete sense with how this started, though, with Hollows getting destroyed, because that was kind of how we first met Uryu. He was all about taking out Hollows, like completely just destroying them. So the hint was there from the first page, as well as Mayori of all people knowing exactly what kind of threat they were going to have to deal with. Of course he'd recognize the handiwork of people that he studied so horrifyingly thoroughly. And Quincy still being around brings up interesting potential conflicts too, like the kinds of things that happen in Superman stories when the supposed last son of Krypton finds out there are other Kryptonians that survived. And yes, I know Uryu wasn't technically the last since his dad turned out to be one, but he might as well have been since Ryukin barely ever helps out. But then again, I guess I'll be curious to see how Ryukin feels about this, or if he knew the whole time. I imagine that this return of the Quincy's plotline will shift Uryu into a more central role, but I thought that's what would happen to Chad when the Fullbringers were brought in, but that didn't really pan out that way. Still, I think there's a better chance for this because it's set up so well. There's always been this natural divide since Uryu was introduced, but he's always kind of stepped at least 1 foot over the line to help his friends. He's found loopholes into helping them. But now, where would his loyalties really lie? I would hope with Ichigo, but the part of me that loves some drama wants to see Uryu choose the Quincy's, if they even want him. If they've been around this whole time, then I'm curious why they didn't already scoop him up, or maybe that's why Ryukin has been so adamant about Uryu not associating with Soul Reapers. Maybe he knew these guys were out there and knew this war was coming. I don't know. So many questions, like the fact that the Quincy's are around at all outside of, Uryu and his dad is wild. I'm still kind of processing it. But yeah, these guys seem super, super dangerous. For one thing, they're popping up in places without anyone noticing. First, like I said, Eburn suddenly being in Ichigo's room. But then we see a group of masked figures suddenly appear in Yamamoto's private office too. Like, think about that. An enemy force infiltrated the heart of the Serite without setting off any big alarms or being stopped. Like, I was like, where is the security? It reminded me of, if anyone watched Smallville at any point. Lex Luthor's a very rich and powerful man, very influential, and people walk into his mansion, into his private library room without any security all the time. They're just constantly going in and out of that room, and sometimes bad guys just stroll in and pull a gun on him. The security was always terrible. And I was thinking that here, I'm like, wow, Yamamoto's security is awful. But I loved Yamamoto's response to this. How he doesn't need heavy security because he is the only security necessary. That was cold, badass, and I loved it so much. I loved this man during the Karakura Town battle, and I continue to love him here. Compared to what he was like in the Soul Society arc where I couldn't stand him, I have turned so hard on this guy. He's so badass. He might need a new lieutenant though, because one of the first things we see these trespassers do is straight up skewer Yamamoto's Lieutenant Chojuro. And if you saw my recent lieutenant ranking update, then you know I'm not exactly a massive fan of him, despite how much I dig his general vibe. He just hasn't ever done anything of much substance in the series. So if someone had to get taken out, it might as well be the guy that hasn't contributed all that much. And if he does end up dying, then the casualties of this war have already really started. You know, as much as he's kind of been a minor lieutenant we haven't seen much of, he is a named character and he is in an important position as far as in relation to Yamamoto. So that's kind of a big deal in story, even if I'm not that blown away by it personally. And these people, the Vandenreich, the Invisible Empire, are giving really cryptic warnings about how they are officially declaring war and how the Soul Society will end in 5 days, which is obviously alarming, but I love it, because there are very few better ways of bringing tension into a story than introducing a ticking clock. We have our time limit and our deadline, where we wonder how the hell these new bad guys are going to destroy the Soul Society in 5 days, and what things will look like on the 6th. And just to make matters worse, it also seems like the Quincy's may be able to like take away or neutralize Bankais somehow, which could be a big problem. A big problem, because a lot of these Soul Reapers rely on their Bankais, you know, but at the same time, maybe this will force some of these characters that haven't shown their Bankais to show their Bankais, and that gets me excited. But thankfully, this whole ritual to get rid of Bankais didn't work on Ichigo. And I assume maybe it's because he's pretty unique among the Soul Reapers, since he's a hybrid between a human and a Soul Reaper. This could give him a very beneficial reason to lead the fight against these guys, if their powers don't work the same on him as they do on everyone else. Also, the way the Quincy's escape these situations by disappearing into their own shadows is a really neat visual that helps separate them aesthetically, and I kinda dig the thematic element to it. These people were supposed to be dead and gone, and now they are shadows of their former selves, only now emerging from whatever darkness they've been lurking in. On that note, let's talk about the introduction of the guy that seems like the new big bad, a man that the anime referred to as the Quincy King. His design looks like a very haggard man that's been in hiding for a while, but it's his presence itself that's really striking, and the way that he's regarded by his subordinates. He definitely inspires fear and loyalty in a much more absolute way than Aizen with the Espada or Ginjo with the Fullbringers, and anything less than competence is treated with immediate harshness and violence and cruelty and terrifying leadership style, but clearly effective if you want like absolute abusive devotion from your underlings. So far, he's obviously a character wrapped in a lot of mystery, but it's the words introducing him in the anime, the very first words of the anime, that caught my attention, and are like the only things I have to go off of with regards to this guy's past. Like, do these words mean that he's been asleep or like recharging? Given the math of this, it seems like we're on year 1000 of this 1000-year blood war, and however long this guy has been, you know, regaining things over the course of time. Is this literal? Is this figurative? Or is this just what he's been up to in all this time, since I assume the Quincy's were like almost exterminated? I don't know, but it's really hype and really kind of intimidating, and I love it. But this part wasn't in the manga chapters I read, but was a hell of a way to open up the anime, so let's talk about the 1000-Year Blood War anime. The chapters I read so far were covered in the first episode, which I watched, so let's talk about this adaptation, because holy hell, it was so beautiful. I expected an improvement in animation quality just because of the time gap between the original series and this, but I wasn't expecting the quality that we got. That was absolutely insane. I imagine that you out there that waited a decade for this episode must have been freaking out even more. Like, what a return. Crazy. The use of colors alone. The original anime had some great visuals sometimes, absolutely. The Lost Agent arc in particular, but this is just an entirely different stratosphere, while still retaining the Bleach feel overall. The use of lighting and shadows really enhanced so many scenes, and the smoothness of the whole thing felt like a movie. Like, I loved the look of the Hellverse film, and this was beyond that. It makes me even more excited to see the adaptation of these scenes because of how it still captures those moments, but in such a different way. It's just so upgraded visually. It's prettier, it's gorier, it's darker, and it's hype as hell. I loved the first episode. Like, it was always interesting watching the episodes so soon after reading the manga chapters, but this was even better than usual. There were some small tweaks, of course, and omissions and additions of note, for better or worse. Like, cutting the rookie Soul Reaper's introduction in Soul Society worked well enough, I thought. You still get enough to understand who they are and how daunting the situation is for them, which might honestly work even better here, because you meet them the moment they're thrown into this. You're kind of carried into it with them. And like, yeah, it was nice to get a little backstory before that of them, but nothing crucial was lost there, I didn't think. Another difference I loved, because I'm me, was just how many more hollows were shown during our hero's introduction. Like, instead of a few hollows, a whole bunch come out of the woodwork and give Ichigo and his friends even more opportunities to show off. That, mixed with the return of the #1 song, was just so exciting and fun, and even me, who hasn't exactly been waiting 10 years for Bleach's return, this still gave me that feeling of Bleach is back. So I can't imagine what it felt like for you guys. I really can't. Because if I was this hype after I finished the original anime like a week ago, if I was this hype, you guys must have been beside yourselves. It was so great. There was one thing that didn't really work for me as far as changes in the anime, which was because of how this starts. They kind of take away the brief mystery of these enemies turning out to be Quincy, because within like the first 10 seconds they refer to a Quincy King and they show the medallion a couple times before we saw it in the manga. Don't get me wrong, it's a cool intro, especially with how they're building this up, but I kind of preferred not knowing what we were going to be up against until Ichigo did. It's a small thing because it wasn't like they held on to that mystery for long, like a chapter or two. So it's not a big deal. It's just I did prefer a little bit of the mystery in the beginning. All in all, though, this was an amazing start to the final arc of Bleach. I loved being immediately thrown into the action and seeing the start of a new war that no one seems prepared for. But if they can get rid of Bankais, they're already taking away one of our best weapons. So this should be one hell of a war. And I think it's going to be crazy. And I'm just so excited to see where this goes as we move into this conflict. But we're certainly on the precipice of a huge final challenge for our characters. And I can't wait. So if you want to see even more of my Bleach journey and how I'm feeling about this arc, you can watch my manga read-along and my anime episode reactions on the Patreon. But as always, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for the continued support. I'm so excited to get into this with all of you. If you want to support the channel a bit extra, you can become a member here on YouTube, or you can join the Patreon. If you join the Patreon, I just ask if possible, don't join through iOS. But yeah, we're going to be diving right into it. And I just don't know what to expect. But we'll see. Hope you all have a great day. Take care. Bye.